The story of the potter of empty clay. In a small forgotten village at the edge of a vast desert, there lived a young man named Kian. He was a potter by trade, working with clay as his father and grandfather had done before him. Day after day, he woke before dawn, kneaded the damp earth with his hands, shaped bowls and jars, and placed them carefully in the kiln. When the vessels cooled, he carried them to the marketplace, where villagers bought them for water, grain, or cooking. People praised him for his skill. His bowls rarely cracked, his jars held water well, and his pots were smooth and strong. From the outside, he seemed fortunate, young, healthy, with a useful craft. But when night fell and silence blanketed the village, Kian sat alone by the dying fire, staring at the stars. Inside him stretched a hollow space he could not fill. He whispered to the darkness, "Why do I do this? The bowls will break, the jars will shatter, and the pots will turn to dust. People will die, I will die, and nothing will remain. Is life only this? Shaping clay until my hands wither, then vanishing like smoke? What is the point?" He asked the village elders, who stroked their long beards and said, "Life is as the gods made it. We live, we die, and the wheel turns again." He asked the priests in the temple, who told him, "Serve faithfully, and in the afterlife you will be rewarded. This world is but a shadow." But these answers brought him no comfort. They felt like ashes in his mouth. The hollow in his chest only grew larger. One evening, weighed down by despair, Kian left the village and wandered toward the desert. The sands stretched endlessly, painted gold by the setting sun. There, on the edge of emptiness, he saw a small fire flickering. Beside it sat an old woman wrapped in a patched cloak. Around her neck hung a string of clay beads, each with strange markings carved into them. Her eyes gleamed like stars reflected in water. "Why do you look so heavy for someone so young?" she asked as he approached. Kian dropped to the sand and buried his face in his hands. "Because life feels empty," he said. "I shape pot after pot, but they break. People die. Even the gods are silent. If life is meaningless, why go on?" The old woman stirred the fire with a stick and smiled faintly. "Tell me, potter, when you shape a bowl from clay, does the clay give it meaning?" "No," Kian said slowly. "It's just earth. I give it shape. And who gives it purpose?" "I do," he admitted. "I decide whether it will hold water, grain, or flowers." The woman's eyes glimmered brighter. "And yet you do not see. Life is clay. The gods gave you raw earth. You are the potter. Shape it." Kian sat in silence. The fire cracked and spat sparks into the night sky. Something in her words stirred his hollow heart. When dawn came, the old woman had vanished, leaving only her fire pit and a single clay bead in the sand. Kian picked it up, turning it over in his palm. Etched into its surface was a spiral, like the endless path of a potter's wheel. He returned to the village with the bead in his pocket and a new thought in his mind: if life is clay, perhaps I can shape it. Back in his workshop, Kian no longer made simple bowls. He began to carve patterns into them, spirals like the bead, waves like the river, stars like those that haunted his sleepless nights. He shaped jars with faces of travelers he remembered, pots with stories painted in clay. The villagers laughed at him at first. "Why waste time with such foolish designs?" they said. "A bowl is for eating, not for staring at." But Kian felt something stir each time he created. The hollow inside him filled, not completely, but enough to keep him working. Travelers passing through the village noticed his strange vessels. Some bought them, carrying them to distant cities. Word spread of the potter whose work held not just water but stories. Still, Kian wrestled with doubt. At night the old hollow whispered, "What if this, too, is meaningless? Bowls break. Stories fade. You will die, and all will be lost." But each morning he rose and worked again, carving his breath and soul into clay. The act itself gave him reason, even if the reason was fragile. Years passed. His hands grew calloused, his arms strong. His workshop filled with vessels unlike any others. And though he still feared the emptiness, he had begun to shape it into something he could hold. One year, famine struck the land. Crops withered, rivers dried, and hunger spread. People came to Kian, not for decorated bowls, but for plain jars to store their meager water. Desperate to help, Kian set aside his art and worked day and night, shaping hundreds of plain vessels. Yet the famine grew worse, and many villagers died, including his closest friend. Grief crushed him. Alone in his workshop, surrounded by plain jars, he shouted at the heavens. I shaped meaning, and still life takes it away. Everything I build is destroyed. Everything I love is stolen. What is the use? In rage, he smashed several of his pots. The shards scattered across the floor like broken hopes. He fell to his knees, weeping. That night, as he lay in exhausted sleep, he dreamed of the old woman by the desert fire. She held the spiral bead and whispered, "Clay breaks. Lives end. That is their nature. Meaning is not in lasting forever. Meaning is in what you give while you exist." When Kian awoke, he gathered the shards of his broken pots. Instead of discarding them, he began to piece them together with melted resin, creating mosaics, pots reborn from brokenness. They were stronger, more beautiful, more mysterious. The villagers, weary from famine, found hope in these vessels. Even the broken can become whole again, they said. Kian's work reminded them to endure. Through loss, he discovered a deeper truth: even shattered clay can be reshaped. Even shattered lives can find meaning again. Years turned into decades. Kian's hair grew white, his back bent, but his hands never ceased their work. His workshop became filled not only with pots and jars, but with mosaics, sculptures, and strange vessels that told the story of his life. Travelers carried his art far beyond the desert. His designs reached cities he would never see. Children in distant lands traced the spirals he had carved, whispering tales they had heard about the potter who gave clay a soul. One winter night, near the end of his life, Kian sat by his kiln. The fire's glow reflected in his weary eyes. Once again the old question rose: what is the point? But this time, he smiled. His gaze fell on the spiral bead that had never left his pocket. Perhaps life had no meaning when it began, he whispered. But I shaped it with my hands, with my pain, with my love. Now it is full. When Kian finally passed from the world, the villagers held a small ceremony. They placed his spiral bead in the largest vessel he had ever made and set it in the temple. They told their children, life is clay. Kian showed us how to shape it. And though his body turned to dust, his vessels remained, some whole, some broken and mended, some carried to faraway places. They were not unbreakable, but they carried his spirit. His life had become a vessel itself, one that poured meaning into others. Somewhere beyond the desert, perhaps in dream or spirit, the old woman with starry eyes whispered to the wind, "See? Even empty clay can hold water. Even a life without meaning can be shaped into a gift." Moral of the fable: life begins as empty clay, raw, fragile, meaningless. But like the potter at his wheel, we hold the power to shape it. Not every vessel lasts. Not every story endures. Yet meaning is not in permanence, but in creation, in giving, in the courage to turn emptiness into something that matters. We may not choose the clay we are given, but we can choose what we shape from it.